Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and following the 3 H's of the channel. And if you couldn't tell by my voice, I am a little bit sick right now, so I hope you can tolerate that in this video about Oklahoma. If that sounds like something you're interested in, definitely pull up a stump with me and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. Maybe you can help me identify something I saw as a kid. I've searched around and I found no info about whatever this was. Don't worry, there's no scary roaring, there's no stalking, there's no attacks, nothing. But this has bugged me, and I'd like to at least know something about what I saw. So I was a kid. I was living in Oklahoma, just little. I was camping in the woods with my parents. We arrived at this clearing in the forest, and my parents began setting up the tent. I run off to explore and do whatever kids do. I walk to the tree line to check out the woods. Once I get there and my eyes adjust to the darkness of the woods, I see this 7 to 8 foot tall, gray-skinned humanoid figure with elongated limbs and what looked to be a tattered black cloak. It was walking parallel to the tree line to my left. As I stare at it, it freezes mid-stride and slowly turns its head to me, kind of in the way that someone does when they realize that they're being watched. It's looking straight at me, but it has no face, just a black void where its head should be under the hood of the cloak. It comes closer to me, and the next thing I know, I am back at camp. The tent is fully put together, and my parents are cooking dinner. And that's it. From what I understand, we stayed the rest of the time we planned, and then we went home without further issue. So what did I see? What kind of thing was it? I don't know. Maybe you do. I have lived my entire life in Oklahoma, and it's probably just about as rural as most of you think it is. Outside of the Oklahoma City, Moore, Norman area, and Tulsa, Oklahoma is mostly small towns, casinos, and lots, and I mean lots, of woods and open plains. There's backcountry galore, a perfect place to teach young scouts the basics without throwing them right into the heart of the fray. It's usually pretty quiet everywhere you go, and people are generally friendly. We're the definition of a flyover state. If there's one thing people immediately relate to Oklahoma, it's our Native American or Indian American heritage, the folklore that comes with it, and the heritage. While this stuff isn't prevalent in the bigger cities at all, it becomes incredibly prominent as you enter the more rural parts of the state. For those curious, I'm not sure how much land is still legally considered native, but it's probably more than any other state. But this particular incident that I'm going to talk about happened in the summer of 2011 at a scout camp not too far from the Oklahoma-Texas border. This was the last trip that I ever made out there, and I don't really regret it. Camp lasts Sunday through Saturday, 1 week. You arrive on Sunday, you work on merit badges Monday through Thursday, you chill on Friday, and you leave Saturday. Now, the leaders of my troop were comprised almost entirely of one family, whom I'll call the Perkins. There was the great-grandfather, C, the grandfather, D, and the grandson, Buck. C was about 75 when I joined, and he fit the crotchety old man stereotype like a glove. He was abrasive, impatient, and quick to lose his temper, while at the same time, he was happy to help any Boy Scout that didn't ask stupid questions. C was also a war veteran. I'm not sure which war though. D was a lot like his father, except, I don't know, cryptic is the best word. I guess what I'm trying to say is that you could tell D had seen some shit. He was a little out there, very my way or the highway type, do what I say if you want to live kind of guy. He was probably 60-ish, but built like a bear. The man was massive and intimidating, and he knew it. To this day, I think D knows a hell of a lot more about this particular incident than he'll ever tell, but I never had the courage to ask him about anything. Buck, the grandson, was a year older than me. Buck was a bit thick in the head, but he was tough and built just like his granddad. He was also as loyal as a golden retriever. The word fear wasn't exactly in his rather limited vocabulary, but I digress. Another key player was my best friend at the time, Dylan. Dylan was stubborn, headstrong, and generally looking for trouble. He and I had started scouts together at 6, and we were the only two that had stuck together since that time. We were pretty much inseparable, which probably saved our lives that night. Now, I was the opposite of Dylan. I was meek, easily scared, and suffered from constitutional delay, which means that I looked like I was 10, even though I was 15. So anyway, we had been going to this scout camp for as long as I had been involved with the troop. Every summer, usually in June or July, we'd make our week trip down there and head home. Dylan and I knew what the camp was supposed to feel and sound like, as did C and D, who had been going there for 20-odd years or so. This year, though, we immediately knew something was off. Have you ever walked into a place that you know very well and just felt like bad vibes? Like bad energy was taking up residence somewhere? It was kind of like that the moment we drove through the gates. The younger boys seemed pretty oblivious, but I know Dylan felt it like I did. And D, man, I don't think I've ever seen D as tense as he was the whole week. He was normally pretty chillax, if a little strict, but he was on edge the moment that we arrived on the grounds until we left on Saturday. I suppose the best way to do this from here on out is to give a chronological account of events that happened day to day over the week. This is the only way I think I can do this without losing myself and you guys. The first thing you do when arriving at camp is to drive to the registration office to confirm campsites, number of boys and leaders, etc. We did all this, but D was gone for a very long time. When he came back, he was being escorted by the camp ranger. As D was hopping back into the sedan, I remember hearing the ranger say something along the lines of, "Just let me know ASAP if anything happens." While this isn't an odd thing to hear or say, I now wonder if it held a deeper meaning. Our campsite was toward the northeast of the camp, down in this tiny valley surrounded by a rock outcropping on the north and on the south. The northern outcroppings were split from east to west and created what we called the storm shelter. Basically, this little crevice that we'd hide in if severe weather ever sprang up. I was assigned to check up on it, to make sure it was clear of debris and stuff before the week started. So I walk around the shelter, and I am slammed with this awful smell. I knew it was something dead, and it smelled big. Once I got down into the crevice, I saw that it wasn't something big, but rather a bunch of small animals in piles. Birds, foxes, raccoons, and parts of a deer. There was a ton of dead, mutilated bodies back there. I nearly puked, it smelled so bad. The heat didn't help either. Alarm bells weren't ringing yet, but I was definitely weirded out. I told D about it, and he said that he'd have a look and clean it up, and that I should just forget about it. Monday. Our campsite was basically set up as one giant semicircle. Our tents formed a ring that almost enclosed pavilions in the center. Very little time was actually spent at our campsite, as we were all out working on merit badges at the mess hall, cantina, shooting range, lake, etc. There was no reason for any boy to be in camp, and it was rare to find one who wanted to stay in camp. Dylan and I stuck together most evenings, and Monday night we decided to shoot, or rather Dylan decided to shoot. I was a terrible shot, and I didn't want to pay for ammo that I'd end up wasting. We were about halfway to the range when he realized he'd forgotten his money, so we turned around and headed back towards the camp. When we got there, it was empty, as expected, but we noticed that one of the tent flaps had been left open. This was a big problem here. Dee was constantly on us to keep our flaps shut, so as to keep any curious woodland animals or insects out of our tents. So I walked over there to zip it up, when I realized that it was still zipped. The door had simply been ripped open. The tent had been ransacked. The sleeping bags were shredded. The trunks flipped over, and the supplies had been gone through. It was an utter wreck. I called Dylan over, and our conversation went something like, "Shit, man, who would do this?" "I don't know. It wasn't one of our boys. Dee would make sure that he would never see the light of day again. Should we tell him? Do you want to have your head bit off? Let's let him find it for himself." This was a stupid decision in hindsight. We should have found Dee and alerted him immediately, but since we didn't want to suffer his wrath, we didn't. We got back to camp that night, and everyone was on edge. All the younger boys were freaking out, whispering about Bigfoot. Dee told us that the rest of the week, we all had to be back at the camp before sundown, which I thought was kind of pointless. The tent had been ransacked during the day, but whatever. Tuesday was actually pretty eventful. All I recall is that some boys a couple campsites over from ours got spooked because they heard noises in and around their campsite that night. If I'm being honest, that could have been anything. There's an awful lot of animal life out in rural Oklahoma, and it's not unusual for new or amateur scouts to accidentally lure raccoons, foxes, or occasionally bigger things into camp by leaving food out at night, but I still have to wonder if it was related to my other experience that week. Wednesday was different. The bad vibes seemed to be getting stronger, or maybe it was just me getting more wound up. I don't know. What I do know is that the mess hall had been broken into the night before and utterly wrecked. Food had been half eaten. Supplies were strewn everywhere. At least that's what I heard. We weren't allowed up to the mess hall until dinner that night, by which time the camp had cleaned everything up. Of course, everyone was on edge now. There were multiple mutterings and whisperings, rumors circulating that would have basically been a cryptid lover's wet dream. One would say, "Did you hear? They found some homeless guy camping out on the other side of the lake." Someone else would say, "Tom found some really weird footprints outside the tent last night. Did you see them?" "I heard some weird mating call last night. Did anyone else?" "I could have sworn I was being stalked walking back to camp last night. Does anyone else feel the same way?" Out of all these rumors, there was one that stuck out to me after the week was over, and the only reason it did is because it reminded me of my experience on Sunday. I found a dead raccoon outside my tent last night. It was like mutilated and shit. Which one of you guys thought it would be funny? I guess outside the mess hall business, Wednesday was fairly uneventful too, just really tense. Thursday. Holy shit, man, Thursday. Thursday night, the camp would always sort of hold this party thing out by the main gate to sort of celebrate the hard work that everyone had put in over the week. There would be a bonfire, a chuck wagon, basically a canteen on wheels, stories and songs and lots of Boy Scout stuff, you know. Anyways, Dee was super against letting anyone in the troop go. He wanted to keep every boy in the camp that night, but after listening to 12 and 13-year-olds whine and cry for 30 minutes, he kind of begrudgingly changed his mind and allowed them to go as long as they were escorted by the older boys. So Buck, Dylan, and I were pretty much responsible for corralling 15 middle schoolers. D said he had a meeting to go to, which I knew was a lie. Scoutmaster meetings were always held in the mornings, never at night, but what the hell. So 3 of us started walking them down there, when I realized that we've left the flashlights back at the camp, and we only have 5 minutes of light left. I tell Dylan and Buck to go on ahead of me, but both of them insist on coming. In the end, Buck escorted the kids to the bonfire, while Dylan and I went back to camp. That was a mistake for multiple reasons. We had only been gone about 10 minutes, which means it was almost dark once we got back. But our camp was totaled. Our pavilions had been torn down. Tents and their contents were strewn about everywhere. Food was out and scattered. It was a complete mess. Alarm bells were basically screaming, "Code red, code red, get the hell out of there, right now." But Dylan was already into the camp before I could stop him. That's when the smell hit us. The smell of dead, decaying stuff. But this time, it was mixed with something else. Kind of a spoiled milk. I'm not entirely sure how to describe it. It's not the typical burnt copper or blood scent that a lot of people say is related to goat man. I know what that smells like. This was something else. Dylan and I both agreed that we needed to find D ASAP. Fate was on our side that night, because not a second later he rushed into the camp in full commando mode. I'm talking giant knife on his hip, brandishing a pistol. Sorry, I don't know what kind of gun it was. I don't know anything about guns. And the biggest flashlight I had ever seen. Dylan and I immediately started blubbering to D about what was going on, begging for answers, almost crying. He told us to shut up in the most harshest but quietest voice I've ever heard. That's when I noticed his face for the first time. He had a gash down the right side of his forehead that was bleeding pretty profusely, and a massive bruise beginning to envelop the left side of his face. It looked like he had picked a fight with a titanium beam and lost. Let me just remind you that D is 6'7" and 260 pounds. Pretty much pure muscle. Whatever bested him was strong. D beckoned us over to him, and the conversation went something like, "Where the hell are the kids?" "The bonfire, sir." "What the F are you two doing back here?" "We forgot the flashlights, sir." All right. Here's what's going to happen. Dylan, I'm going to give you this knife, okay? And then, my name. You go get those flashlights you were talking about and point them toward the storm shelter. I'm going over there. If anything but me comes out, you two run like hell. Do you understand? We nodded, and off he went. He rounded the corner into the shelter, and that's when we heard the noise. Have you ever heard someone trying to talk while choking on their own blood? Something like that. Sort of gurgling, gasping noise. That's what it sounded like, with a mix of a low growling. Dylan and I stood there frozen, for what felt like hours, but it was probably more like 5 minutes, when that noise abruptly ceased, and D returned, pale as a sheet, but in one piece. So D escorted us there and refused to answer any of our questions or give us any sort of closure as to what just happened. All he said was, "I don't think we'll have to worry about anything for the rest of the week." So we went to the bonfire, but Dylan and I kept to ourselves and tried to figure out what the hell was going on. When we got back to camp, we did our best to repair as much as we could in the dark. Dylan and I didn't sleep at all that night. We were wide awake. At what must have been around midnight, I heard a few noises outside, and I saw a flashlight beam waving around before finally coming to its still position, pointed towards the storm shelter. I poked my head out of my tent and observed Dee sitting in a chair, flashlight pointed at the storm shelter, watching and waiting. I watched Dee all night, and Friday, I finally got some answers. By Friday, I mean about 6:30 that morning. Around then, C came out of his tent and proceeded to have a not exactly quiet conversation with Dee. Now bear with me, as I'm reconstructing this from memory. Some bits may not be entirely accurate. Is there anything new? No, I've been out here all night. Nothing since I saw it earlier. I still think you're wrong. They never come this far south, especially this time of year. It must have been something else. I know what I saw, Dad. I'm telling you, they're getting bolder. Or more desperate. Well, I'm heading to the mess hall. I need my coffee. You want anything? And they proceeded to talk about breakfast for a while, and C eventually left. I figured if I wanted any sort of closure as to last night, now was my chance to ask Dee to talk alone. So I approached Dee. Before I could say anything, he turns around and gave me a look that could have curdled new milk. I stopped in my tracks, and he says, "Come, sit." So I sat next to him, and this is all I got out of him. "You were pretty brave last night, kid. Incredibly stupid, but brave. What did you see?" I said, "Nothing, sir." He just responded with a, He was quiet for a good 5 minutes, and I finally mustered up the courage to ask him what the hell was going on. "Sir?" "Yes?" "Pardon me, sir, but what was that? What was going on?" "How old are you?" 15, sir." "Son, the world is a far darker place than you realize right now. You're too young. Let me give you a piece of advice that you have to keep in your head during times just like this. Don't ask questions that you don't want to know the answer to, or that you already know the answer to." "Do I know the answer to this question, sir? Do you?" I said, "It wasn't natural, was it, sir?" "That depends on your definition of natural, son. To me, that thing that's terrorized us all week is as natural as any other creature in these woods and on this earth. It's simply just the darker side of nature, one that usually stays away from heavily trafficked areas like this. They don't really like people, especially in large groups. Then what's it doing here, sir?" "Honestly, I don't know. I think it got confused, lost even. Is it gone now?" "For now, yes. I don't think it'll come back while we're here." Dylan woke up about then, as did the rest of the camp, so our conversation was cut short. The rest of Friday was pretty uneventful. Dylan, Buck, and I palled around camp for a while, talking about what we thought it was. Or rather, Buck and I did. Dylan didn't really talk about it, and acted increasingly irritated as the day went on. Friday night, all was well. I slept heavily. I had bad dreams, but I slept. Saturday, we were up at about 6:30 that morning to tear down the camp. I was ready to go, even though Dee was reassuring Friday morning. I could tell he was eager to leave too. He was tense, and would often stop to look toward the storm shelter. About 11:30, Dee asked me to check the shelter area and clean it up with him, even though no one had used it that week. We got there, and it was completely different than what I'd seen Sunday. It had been cleaned, spotlessly so, and something similar to a sigil that looks like a circle with 2 arrows pointing toward a dot in the center had been marked on each side of the canyon walls. I assume it's Native American, but I don't know what it means, and I have never particularly cared to find out. We left about noon, and I've never gone back. So that's my big story, the one I can't explain. I know D knew way more than he was letting on. I think Buck knew more than I did too, but he clammed up whenever I tried to talk to him about it. So what do you think it was? What was it? I think it might have been Native American, given the symbol, but I don't know what it was. So, let me know what you thought of those two down in the comments. Do you have one of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you'd like to. Also in the description is a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to support the channel that way. And on YouTube there is super thanks. And with that, I will give you and my voice a bit of a rest. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, be sure to like and subscribe. And join us all here on the channel, I guess. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching. Have a good week.